Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. Well, on ESPN's Get Up on Monday, NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky had this to say about who he felt was the best team in the NFL.
Are the Bills actually the best team in the AFC, maybe even in the whole NFL?
The Bills are the best team in the NFL. This is a football team that is offensively as explosive as anybody in the league, and defensively had the best defense in football. I want to make sure and remind everybody that, again, this was the best team in football last year, and this is what they've added this year. They've added Von Miller. They drafted Kyer Elam from Florida in the first round, a cornerback that's going to be a phenomenal NFL pro. They drafted James Cook, a tailback that's going to be a dual-threat Alvin Kamara type of player. They've added Roger Saffold on the offensive line that's going to be a dominant player for their offensive line, and a sneaky good signing in Jamison Crowder as slot receiver. We're talking about a football team that has, this is an argument, best quarterback in football, whether you want it to be Patrick or Josh or Aaron Rodgers, best quarterback in football, and they've got a roster that is 1 through 53 better than anybody. And now they've reloaded with superstar talent. This is the best team in football.
All right, and without further ado, here is the man that just made that statement a day or so ago. It's Dan Orlovsky. Dan, thanks for joining us. And you know, as much as you accurately portrayed what the Bills have done this offseason, you know what I still don't think people talk enough about is they've not only have they added Von Miller, but they added Von Miller to a Bills defense that was number one in the league overall, number one against the pass, and number one on third down and in points allowed.
Yeah, it's a good unit. It's a talented unit. You know, I'll even take it a step further. When Vaughn went from Denver to the Rams last year, we were actually live on NFL Live when that trade went down. And I remember Marcus Spears saying they got him in just to be a closer, and kind of put it in a baseball terms of they're not asking Vaughn to be Vaughn from 5 years ago on an every down basis. And that's the same thing that the Bills are not going to ask him to do, because it's not a needed thing. They don't need Vaughn to come in and be the most dominant defensive end in football. They need him to be a closer. And this is where team building and roster building and kind of how everything is connected comes into place. This offense should be very good, and it should score a ton of points. And when you do that, your defense gets to play a little bit one-sided. Teams got to throw the ball a little bit more because they're going to be down. And that's when I think Vaughn's going to have an impact. They're also going to get Tre'Davious back healthy and hopefully coming off of his knee injury. And I called college football games for ESPN, and I called probably 4 or 5 Florida games. And I've sat with Todd Grantham, the defensive coordinator at Florida, and asked him about a player like Kyer Elam. And when you can call SEC games and watch him play against SEC receivers and ask coaches about him, you get an idea, you know, kind of how good of a player he is and different of what the team success is.
And the Bills seem to be building this roster with these guys that you've mentioned. One thing I've noticed over the course of Sean McDermott's tenure here in Buffalo, they seem to be up on the trend of where the league is headed. They were doing 11 personnel way before a lot of other teams were doing 11 personnel offensively. They stacked up with a slot receiver in Cole Beasley, a dedicated slot receiver. They added some speed with Isaiah McKenzie. They have always seemed to be one of those teams that kind of is out in front of personnel usage and how they do things. And this offense here with Buffalo, where they get a guy like James Cook from Georgia, a guy who is a little Alvin Kamara-ish in his skill set, and the way that their defense has been deployed, certainly not a spectacular defense, but like you said, statistically really tough. They seem to be on the cutting edge. Where do you see the next step in the evolution of these roster builds going to? I mean, we know 11 personnel is the predominant personnel offensively. What are defenses doing in response to that?
Yeah, I think you're obviously seeing defenses put more secondary players on the field, you know, and it's kind of in, I guess, 3 different ways they play with, you know, 3 big safeties, you know, so they'll have a safety playing down in a nickel position type of place. They'll have some safeties playing down at linebacker spots. You'll see them putting 4 cover corners on the field on early downs. You know, I think one of the things that happened over the past couple of years in the NFL offensively was a lot of coaches took their third down offense and started to call it on first and second down. And I think you're seeing defenses do that now, get their third down defenses on the field and call third down defenses to match those first and second downs defensively. I think one of the interesting things, even more so, Steve, with the Bills is now that Ken Dorsey's their play caller, I could even see them diversifying their personnel usage even more. I think because of the addition of Cook and O.J. Howard, you feel good about getting into some 2 tight end personnel packages. Sometimes those could be 2 tight end, 3 receivers. I could see O.J. Howard, Dawson Knox, Gabe Davis, obviously Diggs and Crowder on the field at the same time and living in a little bit of an empty world with Josh. I could see them putting 2 backs on the field and 3 receivers and living in that James Cook Singletary 3 receiver world, or 2 backs and a Dawson Knox and 2 receiver world. And I think you could see a little bit more personnel grouping diversification. And that's challenging for defenses if you don't have, and I think it's all going to be dependent on who you're playing defensively. This team's really strong in their front. Well, let's spread them out. This team's really strong in their linebacker unit. Well, maybe when we want to force those cats to cover. This team's really strong in their coverage unit. Well, maybe we'll put our 2 tight ends on the field then and run a little bit more. And so I think that we'll see a little bit different, personality out of their offense.
Knowing how much, you like to chew on scheme, Dan, let's take that a step further, because you mentioned the 2-back thing, and I think that's a very viable possibility. Are the Bills in a position with the personnel that they have on their roster where 22 personnel isn't necessarily a power formation with the talent they have on this roster? Because I'm thinking Cook, Singletary, Knox, Howard, that's not your mom and dad's 22 personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the ability to do whatever you want out of it. And it's really important for people to understand how kind of that stuff happens. And Steve, you guys know this is the ball gets snapped and the play gets run, the player goes down. Okay, 40-second clock comes. And now the coach is sitting there, right, face covered because everyone, whatever, and they're calling out their personnel grouping, and that's when the personnels are exchanging. And defenses match their call people-wise to the personnel and the situation. So you get to a 2nd and 6, and here comes the Buffalo Bills running on their 22 personnel with those 4 players and a Diggs at wide receiver, and the defense has got to call what they believe is the most likely situation play call-wise to match. Well, what happens if I get to 22 personnel and all of a sudden we come out and empty, but you've matched with linebackers, you've matched with bigs, you're dead. And now what you could see Ken Dorsey doing is not only do you get into that on second down, but then you play no huddle football in that too. Like if you get them stuck in that defensive personnel, you get them in, and you could play spread out ball. Yeah. You could get into an 11 personnel formation where one of those tight ends could be soloed backside. You can get one of those tailbacks into a slot. I mean, there's just so much, and it's to be honest with you, it's very NBA. It's very New England Patriot-ish where, and I know that's, you get shot or punched in the face for saying those right. 3 words in Buffalo, but it's that positionless football, so to speak.
You played quarterback in the NFL for a while and a long time, and you've seen the effects of an offensive coordinator change, like the one in Buffalo, where you get a new guy coming in. Now they have advanced Ken Dorsey from within, so he's been in the room for a couple of years with Josh. Kind of relate to us from a quarterback's perspective how that can affect and change, or how could it or will it affect a quarterback like Josh Allen in this offense? What will it look like, and the good and the bad, or the plus or the minus of it?
Well, I think we've kind of hit on a little bit of like the potential personnel changes. I don't think it's really change as much as it promotes continued development. Ken doesn't have to figure out, how's this guy think? How's this guy understand? How's he study? What's he like? How does he like to watch tape? Thursday game week, how does he like his schedule to be? And what allows him to be at his absolute best or most ready? So that you don't have to spend time understanding that he's been in his ear before. Josh has heard his voice in game. And so I don't think that there's much of a change. You don't have to take 2 steps forward to take, or 2 steps backward to take 1 step forward. And so I think that you're just going to see Josh continue to take a not only development growth, but also play at that high level on a consistent basis, where whether it's week 2, week 10, week 16, you have a pretty good feel of how he's going to continue to play.
And I don't have to tell you this, Dan, but every year he's put something on his to-do list to get better at, and we've seen him be appreciably better in whatever area it was. And this past offseason, he said one area where he wanted to get better was to set his targets up to get more yards after the catch. Steve has often commented that Josh is more of a put it on the receiver type thrower rather than a throw a player open type thrower. And he is determined to get better in that area. Now with Crowder, who I would argue is a better run after catch player than Beasley, and with Cook, and with the kid Khalil Shakir now on the roster, and him trying to get better in that area, for a team that finished 20th in total yards after the catch in the league last year, how much of a jump do you think is realistic in that particular category for this offense?
It's realistic if Jameson gets the same feel that Cole Beasley had. I mean, for everything that Cole had phenomenal feel, and he really saw the field the same way as Josh. There's sometimes, Cole runs his route and it's not even a route. He's just literally just running to green grass or space or whatnot. And Josh saw it the same way. So how quickly Jameson kind of gets that to that same level of understanding and seeing it the same way with Josh is paramount, because that's what's going to promote getting him the ball with the least amount of people near him. I don't think that Josh has had a James Cook. I think Singletary is a solid pass catcher, but I don't think he's had that guy out of the backfield that you can really say, hey, man, we are just going to get into a 3-by-1 formation, and we're going to let this kid work backside on that linebacker, and you read him. And I think that the biggest challenge that a talented, and I saw this with Matthew Stafford a little bit when we had a player like, we had this really good pass-catching tailback out of Notre Dame, Theo Riddick was his name. And it really took Matthew legit me into the middle of the season to get a feel for how he was such a good route runner. He would make Matthew confused about what he was doing. So that'll be a big thing for Josh, is not only because that's where ball placement becomes paramount, and if I think you're breaking in and you're just setting the guy up to break out, well, we're not seeing it the same way. So I think those are the two big things for those two players with Josh to really promote the amount of yards after catch that kind of you're referencing.
And the Bills, and we talk a lot about offense and defensively, one of the shocking things that took place this offseason was for Buffalo was the Von Miller signing. Nobody saw that coming. Even we here who got our ear to the ground saw that as a bolt out of the blue a little bit. The contract, everything, even his decision to even accept the deal was a little bit of a surprise. How big a difference, even at this point of his career. You said he's a closer, coming to a number one defense where he doesn't have to really carry a load, and they rotate their players through, no question about it. If the Bills get a guy like Von Miller to close out games, to do that kind of stuff, what's the best way to attack a defense with the way the Buffalo Bills deploy it? I mean, you got this guy on the edge. You got a couple of good corners. I mean, where's the league headed offensively in attacking a defense like the Bills?
Yeah, I think the team that's best suited to do it is the team that did it last year in the regular season, which was New England, is really try to slow it down, huddle, minimize possessions, and play as physical as you can. And hopefully that the speed and the athleticism is somewhat minimized, that you're not giving them multiple pass rush opportunities. It is the Tennessee Titans, it is the Indianapolis Colts, and it is the New England Patriots. Those are the three teams in that conference. Maybe Denver as well, because now Nathaniel Hackett brings over that Mike Shanahan stretch, offensive system. The way that the game is set up right now with how quickly the ball can get out, how athletic the quarterbacks are, the minimization of rules where I can't put hands on you a ton. as a receiver and I can't really hit you across the line or across the middle of the field, you're really looking for guys that can get to the quarterback as quickly as possible, make them feel uncomfortable, and then you have to have multiple cover guys and at both levels, both linebacker and secondary. That's what Buffalo has. And so if they can match that physicality a little bit, like obviously they did in the playoffs, that defense is still going to be at worst a top 3 unit.
Last one I've got for you, Dan, concerns the announcement on Monday that the Bills will be playing Week 2 on your guys' network, Monday Night Football against the Titans here at Highmark Stadium in Buffalo. Are you still trying to put your finger on what the Titans are going to be? I mean, obviously it's still Derrick Henry, but they've got a number 1 wideout void to fill. I know they have Robert Woods, who's as good a number 2 as you'll find. But there's some up-in-the-air stuff with the Titans that kind of leaves them a bit of a question mark. Even as late as Week 2, they could still be that question mark.
Yeah, the really interesting thing for me with Tennessee is, so one of the reasons why their offense was so fun last year when they were healthy was because of those 3 monsters, I called them, Derrick Henry, Julio Jones, and A.J. Brown. And the reality was you got so many one-on-ones for those receivers, Julio and A.J. Brown on the perimeter. It was simplified. Hey, we're going to run the football with Derrick, and we're going to get those one-on-one matchups and static formations, and we're just going to throw go routes and comebacks and outs and slants. And it was a little bit simplified because of that, because those 2 receivers were so big that they could do that. The interesting thing is that I believe is still their identity or what their preferred identity is, but Robert and Traylon are not line them up outside one-on-one guys. They're more get creative with them. They're more usage guys. They're more how many different ways can we get you touches guys, rather than, hey, I'm going to put you out at wide receiver at number 1. You're going to get one-on-one coverage, 15 snaps this game. I need you to win 12. And that'll be the really kind of fascinating thing for me to pay attention to Tennessee's offenses. How do they take advantage of those one-on-ones when they don't really have guys that are one-on-one killers?
Last one for me, Dan. The schedule's coming out this week. What do you think there's going to be any surprises? What do you think? What are you going to look for first when the schedule comes out? Obviously, it has to do with your schedule, any games you're going to work, and what are the marquee game matchups that you're looking for? I mean, we here in Buffalo talk about the Bills-Chiefs game, the replay of the 13-second loss.
You guys are playing Green Bay, right?
Yeah. The Bills are playing Green Bay, and I believe the Green Bay Packers are here.
Yes.
They are.
So that's going to be one as well.
And we have Bills-Rams, too.
Yeah, Bills-Rams. We got 3 Thanksgiving games. We got 3 games on Christmas Day. What are you going to look at first in the schedule, Pops?
Yeah, I think in relation to Buffalo, I'd say what's early and what's late look like, because that's when you might not be as good as you are early on because whatever young players are coming along, and then what's it look like late because that's when you want to be playing your best. I think the Green Bay game is fascinating, but more of a Green Bay perspective. I think Buffalo obviously is the best team in football, and if Green Bay thinks that they have any shot of a Super Bowl, I want to see how they match up against the team because they're not going to have a ton of challenge, so to speak, in the NFC. I think that what in the Tampa Bay, New Orleans, I want to see just because Tampa Bay's lost 4 straight to them in the regular season. I think Tampa Bay's worse than they were last year. I think New Orleans is better. The AFC, and you guys know that, I think there's 8 teams in the AFC that are bona fide Super Bowl contenders. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, does anyone have a little bit of a softer December? Because it might be needed to make a final run.
Dan, enjoy chopping it up with you. Really enjoy your work on ESPN. We'll keep watching. Thanks for the time.
Dan.
We appreciate it.
Thanks, fellas.